CTC meeting for the 9th of March 2016. Just noticed the document has the wrong date, so I'll fix that. And we've got a fairly small agenda today. We're going to quickly go through a stand-up. So let's go with the order that we've got in our minutes document, starting with Evan.
Hey, yeah, I've been mainly working on issue and PR triage, got a path regression fix, and some doc updates. Next is Colin.
So I've done a little bit of issue and pull request triage. I've been working on creating some failing test cases, some libuv work, and mostly just working on slides for a talk that I'm giving on Friday. Next up is Michael Dawson.
Yep, been doing some work to get the Ansible build scripts in place for AIX. I'm pushing forward the V8 testing job in the node tree, working on some other miscellaneous issues, and started to work on defining the benchmark use cases. And next in line is Brian White.
Not a whole lot for me. Just commenting on issues and PRs as usual. Worked on event emitter once, performance some more. I did come up with one solution that's compatible with the existing readable stream, but it's not. There's some performance regressions, but anyway, that was about it for me. The next is Trevor.
Only thing to note was fixing a bug in HTTP where it threw, it wouldn't propagate to like unki exception. Actually, it wouldn't propagate at all. That's it. I don't have the list in front of me.
Bert's next. I'm here, but I don't have anything to talk about as far as last week goes. Next one. Next is me, James. Been working on pull requests, trying to get the buffer API changes finished up, getting the process warn stuff finished up. Also got a couple of others that are based on older, long-standing issues. So aside from doing pull requests, also working on coming up with questions for a node certification test, helping some people out on that. So if anybody has any cool ideas on how to trip people up on things like buffers and things like that, let me know. Other than that, that's it. Next is Rod.
Me. Been occupied with travel and other company stuff. Spent way too much time with Jenkins. We moved the release slaves off ci.nodejs.org to ci-release.nodejs.org, and that is more locked down in terms of security. We've re-provisioned most of those slaves, so we're starting from scratch for most of them. So we have much more solid security guarantees for our release process, just to keep the integrity there. That is working now. We've seen 3 releases this week, so that should be all good. The only thing that's still outstanding is nightlies are turned off because of the authentication thing, but I'll be fixing that this week. Next is Ali.
So I've been away at a company offsite for part of the week. Other than that, I was working on getting ready to land V8 4.9 and also looking at some of the issues regarding integrating V8 inspector into Node for the 6.0 timeframe. Next is
Hey, I've been kind of pulled off on NPM stuff, but I've been spending a little bit of time on the stack analysis work. Next is Nikita.
Nothing significant this week. Some comments and reviews. The buffer pair looks good to me. that James noted. Next is Jeremiah.
Hello, I've been doing some issue PR triage, but working also a lot on releases. Did 5.7.1 last week and 5.8.0 this week. Nothing too notable though outside of that. Seth Thompson's next.
Hey guys, just been working a bit with the V8 team on making it easier to, build things like Node on our infrastructure and other embedders, but nothing concrete yet.
Michael Rogers next.
Hey, working on this flatten proposal thing that we'll probably talk about in a little bit, and also writing some compliance automation now that the legal committee is almost done with the recommendation for how we need to put stuff. I'm working on a big PR kind of restoring and adding copyright and licensing information to the project. So next is Alexis.
Yeah, I've been working on a couple of Windows issues. One with key pass events that's giving people grief. Another one with long file names, loading modules. And also I've been onboarding a couple more developers on my team to work on Node. Next is Rich Trott.
Hi, so I've been mostly identifying old and stale issues and either closing them or reanimating them. Special apology shout out to Ben, who I've been mentioning every 30 seconds for the past 24 hours. And I've also been going down a few blind alleys and dead ends, doing a bunch of work that then I realized ain't gonna fly. So, and last but not least, I spent some time this morning making sure that the present list and the stand-up list were in the same order to avoid the which list are we looking at problem that we have sometimes. And that looks like it works, so I'm pretty pleased about that.
Yep. Thanks for that, Rich. And thanks for everyone taking notes in the doc. It's great to see all the activity in there. A review of last meeting, we pretty much only did the CTC membership voting, and so we have 4 new members with us this week who are officially members of the CTC. No, that wasn't last week actually. That was 2 weeks ago. We didn't have a proper meeting last week. So on the agenda today, we've got 3 items. We're going to be able to flick through the first 2 fairly quickly, I think. So the first one is the testing working group has been proposed for ratification. So Rich, do you want to tell us about the status of that and make a motion?
Oops. Sorry, I'm muting the wrong people. So here we go. Yeah, I don't know that I have much to add to what's in the PR, which I hope most people have looked at, but we've been doing some work for a while and we have a charter together and we have a pretty good group, I think. And we meet every 3 weeks and we actually do stuff. It's pretty exciting. And I would like to move that we ratify that group. Would anybody like to say anything?
So I haven't actually read through all this. Just as a question, does this for actually making changes to the test? So is this just for existing collaborators, or is it sort of like the docs working group where we might add more people to core?
It is like the docs working group in that there are people in there who are not currently well, there's only one person there's not currently a collaborator, and he's scheduled to be onboarded soon. It's Santi, who's on your list, I think.
Right. Yeah, I was mostly asking if they were going to be onboarded through the regular core process, or if they were sort of going to get like onboarded however the docs working group plans to like.
Oh no, I don't think we intend to have a separate onboarding process. I think people, can participate but don't get any privileges to the repo or anything until they're onboarded. And I should also mention that this working group, the charter will also have to be ratified by the build working group because previously some elements of test and infrastructure, well, obviously infrastructure, but test infrastructure fell to the build working group, and while a lot of it, most of it probably still will, this is either really does or is perceived as more than just butting up against the build working group. But I think we have broad support in the build working group, so I'm not worried about that. But ratification here today would not be sufficient. Necessary, but not sufficient.
Part of our recent changes to Jenkins as well have been to enable different permissions models for allowing different working groups certain kinds of permissions through Jenkins as well, including the testing working group. Okay, let's do a little vote. So everyone in favour of ratifying the testing working group, say aye.
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 Aye. And anyone not in favour? And anyone abstaining? Nope. There's the vote. Let's move on then. The next item is still issue number 3979, which is the legal advice. That's not moved much, although I think, Michael, you've probably got more internal insight into what the lawyers are doing. You suggested earlier that there might be some movement getting closer to resolution here.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously going to have to be ratified by the legal committee and then by the board. But we have enough we have enough out of there already that we can get a patch together. And one thing that I've been doing in trying to put this tool together is we identified a bunch of files that actually fall under totally different rules that we hadn't even considered yet. So I asked what we're supposed to do there just from our kind of in-house counsel. And they gave a pretty good recommendation on how to do when files are essentially dual licensed. So we have some resolutions there as well. So expect a really, really big PR at some point about that.
Okay. We'll come back with updates on that as they happen. The next one is, Michael, you've put this on the agenda, I think, today. Flatten project scope, the TSC and structure stuff. That's on the TSC repo number 59. Can you tell us about this and why it's at the CTC level?
So, all right. So there's a lot of context that happened in the TSC that probably hasn't happened here. But in the last TSC meeting, talked a bit about what the scope of the TSC should be, and also some of the problems that we have in terms of defining what something's relationship to core is, what the structure of the TSC is, and what all the interdependencies are. There's a lot of trouble with communication right now between all the different moving parts. I think that a lot of people on this call have some a little bit more of a narrow focus on just getting kind of work and core done. And that's good. We need to keep getting stuff done. For the few people that have tried to really figure out what is going on org-wide, it's become increasingly impossible. We used to have a much better idea of what was going on in the org because basically everybody in this meeting would be involved in some way in one of those groups, and we relied really heavily on that. But the workload has gotten too massive for anybody to really keep their head around. So without investing in some better kind of communication and coordination, we're really going to lose any idea of what's going on out there. And if me and Rod can't figure out what's going on across the org, then we can basically assume that nobody in the community can really understand what's going on. So we're in this place where we're doing everything very transparently, which is great, but we also are now at a place where the volume is so high that we can't effectively communicate it. So basically, there's a proposal to scope the TSC specifically to groups and subgroups that have some measurable connection to core development. So that that can be something as broad as our website, which does 99% of things that have nothing to do with core, but it also happens to be where to distribute Node.js. So it definitely does need to be integrated into core development. Or like the evangelism working group does a lot of stuff outside of core, but they are integrated in the development. They do help us promote releases, stuff like that. So yeah, essentially that would be the one kind of limiting factor on what the TSC does. And then there's a proposal essentially to flatten out the org structure so that rather than have all of this stuff under the CTC and have the CTC be responsible for trying to communicate all of these subgroups, which it's not happening right now because the CTC is too busy doing core. It would become the TSC's responsibility to find better ways to communicate and coordinate between the groups. So this obviously has to be ratified by the TSC and the CTC and any affected working groups that are of a sizable scale that we would worry. So I'm curious what people think on this call, since this is probably the first time that a lot of people that are on the TSC have heard about a lot of this stuff.
So. Are you saying that the working groups would report directly to the TSC on this new structure, for example, benchmarking or testing?
Right. So I think like right now the CTC and the TSC, nobody really manages these groups in like a heavy-handed way, right? They're autonomous units. But the problem is that we don't really know what's happening in them unless somebody working on them happens to be in this meeting. So it would essentially become the TSC's responsibility to find ways to communicate what that working group is doing, whether it's a roll-up of their activity that the CTC can read at their leisure, so that anybody in this group that needs to know what's going on in benchmarking understands that. The way that the charters and autonomy work would basically be the same, right? So right, like the CTC would still approve a charter that was delegating some responsibility of its, right? It's just that working group would then just be right under the TSC, and the TSC would handle making sure that it reports properly and that everything gets communicated so that the CTC knows what's going on.
Under the current structure, the CTC is responsible for escalation from those working groups. So with the new structure, escalation from controversial issues in benchmarking or build would then go to the TSC, which then would have to be competent into those issues, correct?
Well, not necessarily, right? So like one thing that the CTC never delegates and probably never will is authority to commit things to core, right? Like everything that gets committed to core is under the CTC. So if one of these working groups has an escalation that is related to getting something into core, that escalation would still go to the CTC. It would still go to the core group. It would not go to the TSC. And the TSC would stay out of the technical side of pretty much any decision making.
So, I mean, I get what this is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think where I'm bumping up against it. I mean, just along the lines of the questions I just asked, I think it ends up adding to the confusion. If we say that these things, that these working groups that right now are chartered by the TC, if the TSC is suddenly responsible for the communication, but I mean it makes that line very fuzzy and very confusing about, okay, what is the role of the TSC versus the role of the CTC with those working groups? And personally, I'm just not seeing the value of this particular change. The rest of it is fine, but for this existing set of working groups, I think it just makes the most sense to leave those where they are.
Well, okay, so like I'll ask a very simple question, which is like, how many people on the CTC right now have any idea what the website did over the last month? Because under the current structure, it's basically the CTC's job to understand that and let the TSC and the board and the public understand what's going on the website.
There's probably a handful of these that can move up. Website, I would say, okay, yeah, that one can move up to the TSC. It's a separate repo. It's really not something that anyone on the core team actually deals with. But for things like the build work group or the documentation work group, these are things that touch the main repo, right? And it's something that the CTC absolutely needs visibility in and has visibility in what's happening. So there may be some subset of these that makes sense to move, but not all of them.
So, like, this is the difficulty that you run into, though, because, like, where do you draw that line? Because all of these are integrated into core development in some way, but there's just a spectrum of how integrated they are and how much broader their scope is. I mean, do you remember when at that thing like 6 months ago where we tried to actually draw like something like an org chart where we tried to figure out what the dependencies were between different groups, and it like just looked like this big web of a mess. Like it was just like impossible, basically.
Well, I mean, okay, you can really simply draw the line and say anything that requires committing to core, so like docs and tests, just as a preliminary, be very easy to draw the line there.
Well, I would add that like the fact that it's just quite clear where to draw the line, that seems like a poor argument to make a very sweeping change and like move everything to the other side. Like, you know, let's make an effort here, and you know, okay, website probably makes sense, build probably doesn't. You know, what do we think about benchmarking? And you know, move the things over that make sense.
Also,
yeah, I mean, looking at this list, I mean, I-18N, yeah, that could be moved up. Evangelism, yes. Roadmap, perhaps.
Roadmap seems a little weird, actually, because I assume that is the technical roadmap for core that we're maintaining there. Or
okay.
the discovery process. Yeah.
It's the foundation
roadmap. Build, tracing, add-on, benchmarking, postmortem, INCL, HTTP, documentation, promises, and security all touch on what's happening in core, in the core main repo. So I think we could take a couple of these, yes, and move them out. I don't think we can do it all.
I think
at least not.
With the exception of build, in that list, most of those groups are almost like teams more than they are full-on working groups. Like there's a lot of it is just like it's a way to organize a bunch of work going directly into core. With the exception of build, like most of what build does is actually not commit to core. Release people commit to core, but that's actually managed by the CTC directly.
But one question I have is, how does moving it to the CTC solve the problem? Isn't it, you know, there's a good overlap between the two sets of people?
Yes, I was going to ask the same question. We have a problem.
Well, that's the point, is that there's not a good overlap of people anymore, and the volume of work is too great to rely on that anymore.
Are there, I mean, in the TSC, are there a bunch of people who aren't in the CTC?
There's a few now, but like honestly, we haven't really touched membership on the TSC yet. So the membership on the TSC would probably end up changing if we put a bunch of new stuff under it, right? So that's and honestly, so there isn't, with the exception of me, and I don't really like have time to participate, and I'm probably going to be backing away quite a bit. In this meeting, there's not people that are like very active in the website, in evangelism, in the actual translation communities, in some other ones that I'm forgetting. I don't even know, actually. There's too many. There's way too many of these groups to keep my head around.
But is just changing the structure going to solve the communication problems that we're facing? I mean, that's not going to be sufficient. We're going to have to come up with some other strategies for that, right?
Yeah, no, we're going to have to write automation. We're going to have to come up with some kind of like reporting structure where on a monthly or quarterly or whatever basis, somebody from the working groups like writes a blog post or something about what they've been doing. But like I don't think that it's reasonable to expect the CTC to follow through on getting any groups to do that, because from our experience so far, like the CTC is heads down making core happen, and just dealing with that task is growing at, what is it, like 30% a month or something?
So you actually make a very good point about most of these being more informal teams than actual working groups. I know that's particularly true for things like HTTP. and especially true for like, you know, the LTS. So I'm wondering if for a handful of these, if it just doesn't make sense to clean up the work groups and just make them these informal teams. So for anything that we have going on under core, instead of saying, you know, the first thought being, hey, let's go create a work group for this thing, let's just organize a team that does this informally and not have to worry about chartering anything. It's worked rather well for, you know, for LTS, for instance.
Yeah, and
which is why.
Like, there actually are teams as well that are already doing this without a charter and working pretty well, right? So like there's a crypto team and a couple other, like they're relatively small compared, but like I think that we've been equating, like, if you want to have a repo to do communication outside of the core repo, you need to call that a working group. I don't think that's entirely necessary. I mean, unless you're basically trying to get the group to do stuff that's outside of core, then I don't see why you need a working group necessarily.
We never said that there should be a one-to-one correspondence between repos and working groups, right?
No, there's nothing saying that. And in fact, like the website working group maintains multiple repos. So.
And the LTS team has its own repo that's without being a chartered working group. So yeah, I'm just wondering if that's actually a way forward here. Is that the working groups themselves are, yeah, they're chartered by the TSC. Anything that's on the TC side would just be a team and not an actual chartered working group, which may mean unchartering some of the working groups that are there. Like it probably makes sense to just, you know, not have it as an HTTP working group, just have it as a team.
Well, I mean, yeah, we can use the charter as the script of the team. So
I'm a bit skeptical that these formal definitions would actually help us make any progress towards solving the problems.
So it does a couple things. It allows us to
this communication
gives us a path to representation in the TSC among a lot of the not core related stuff, right? So like all of the teams that we just discussed, there are people from those teams on the CTC, and they probably wouldn't have a team if there wasn't like enough people there and integration in the core to be on the CTC. So I don't think that there's like a huge problem in communication, say, between LTS and core. But I do think that there's a problem with communication about what is going on in core to the public and to the rest of the community, and a big problem with some of these other groups and their communication with the rest of the organization.
Yes, could you maybe summarize those problems, and maybe we could try to find solutions for each one of them and see if this restructuring is really the best solution forward. Also, the TSC is trying to figure its mission and mission of the foundation, and it's also a subset of this group of people, so they're also too busy for their own mission, right? So giving them an extra burden of ensuring that all this communication happens is not just going to happen because of a structural change.
Well, okay, so part of this is that scope, and we'll talk about that tomorrow in the TSC meeting. But it does actually set the scope to, like, the TSC is not going to take on stuff that doesn't get integrated in some way in the core development.
Okay, so I suggest that we move on from this and like treat this as an awareness raising exercise today. If you want to engage on this, then head over to issue number 59 on the TSC repo and join the meeting tomorrow, the same time as today, tomorrow for TSC meeting. If you'd like to talk about the original CTC or the original TSC are members of the new TSC now. As we've added members to the CTC, we've not added a corresponding membership, but you're welcome to join the meeting. There'll be details on the issue that I post today for that meeting about how you can join. So you're welcome to join for discussion tomorrow, and otherwise engage with the issue over there. Is there anything pressing on this that anyone wants to mention now before we close up discussion on this particular thing that can't be dealt with on GitHub or tomorrow? No. Okay. Let's move on because we're nearly at the top of the hour. We were going to do there was an other business section. If anyone has anything to add, is there anything that hasn't come up on the agenda that could have been?
Trevor mentioned in the chat earlier that he wanted to mention something about the EPs.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure nobody would totally hate this. A while ago in the Node EP, it was decided that we should disable the issues. There is one PR in there that is pushing 500 comments. It's just getting ridiculous. And so what I'd like to do is outline clearly in the README what issues are to be used for, which would be to basically have subtopics on an EP if the topic or if the thread gets too long, like this one I'm talking about. I would just be zealous about monitoring it and closing any that don't follow that guideline that's outlined in the README. But that conversation needs to be broken up somehow, and this is the simplest way I can think of to do so.
I think that's probably a good idea. I think for regulating issues, like we can have an issue template in that repo too then, or even both, like an issue and PR template. And the issue template can just say, if this is not like discussing a subcomponent of an existing EP, we will close it.
Forgot about that. That's a good idea.
Easy.
Okay.
Does anyone else have thoughts about that?
If we enable issues and then decide to disable them because it's just getting out of hand, do we lose all of that issue content? Does anyone know?
Sorry, what?
As far as I know, you can disable and it will retain. In case you re-enable it later, it will come back. So it doesn't.
Yeah, we've done this with the TSC repo before when it was getting trolled a bunch. We disabled all the issues on it, and all the issues are still there once we undisabled it.
Okay. Any concerns before we move on? No. Okay, let's lastly we're going to try a Q&A again with people listening on the live stream and on IRC. What channel did I say? Node Dev. So if there's anyone in Node Dev on Freenode that is listening, we'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments that we can engage with. We'll leave this open for a few minutes.
I'm also watching the live stream. There's like 4 people watching, I think. So if anyone comments there, I'll let you know.
It looks like someone asked for the live stream in Node Dev, which I guess it's probably a little late to post it now, but maybe something to remember from.
Sorry, what did they ask?
They asked, they said, no live feed? So I guess, it might be good to post the link in there next week. That's all.
Okay, let's move on, but I think this is a good thing to enable anyway. So we'll try it for a few weeks and see if we can get any traction. Okay, next meeting is the 16th. It's next Thursday, next Wednesday. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see some of you tomorrow in the TSC meeting. Otherwise, we'll see you on GitHub. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Well,
thanks.
Adios.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Call recording off.
Adios. Thanks. Bye.